Listen up, because what went down on NBA Today regarding DeAndre Ayton's preseason debut performance is going to make you believe the Lakers finally got the defensive anchor that LeBron and Luka desperately need. And I'm not talking about some preseason overreaction where one good game against third-string competition suddenly transforms someone into a Defensive Player of the Year candidate. We're talking about Ayton playing 18 minutes, displaying the kind of defensive intensity, energy, and commitment that made him the anchor of that 2021 Suns team that went to the finals and was the third-best defense in all of basketball. We're talking about him grabbing 8 rebounds, including 2 offensive boards, while altering shots at the rim, and providing exactly the type of rim protection this team hasn't had since they lost Dwight Howard. And most importantly, we're talking about a 26-year-old player who's publicly stated this is his last chance to prove he can be a winning championship contributor instead of just another talented big man who never fulfilled his potential. When Malika Andrews brought in the film breakdown showing Ayton's positioning, his defensive rotations, his effort on the glass, and then Kendrick Perkins started criticizing Austin Reaves for not feeding Ayton when he had obvious mismatches in the post, I had to pause because this isn't just about box score statistics from one exhibition game. This is about whether Ayton has finally internalized that defense and effort matter more than individual scoring numbers, and whether he can sustain this mindset across 82 games instead of just showing up occasionally when he feels motivated. So I'm watching NBA Today as they're setting up their Lakers preseason coverage, and suddenly the entire panel shifts into this cautiously optimistic analysis mode because everyone understands that one preseason game confirms nothing about a player's career trajectory, especially someone like Ayton, who's shown flashes of greatness before, only to disappear for extended stretches when intensity wanes or he gets frustrated with lack of offensive touches. You could feel Stephen A. Smith wrestling with this tension between wanting to believe Ayton finally gets it versus remembering all the previous years where players looked great in October only to regress completely once real games started mattering in April and May. The panel was being careful not to crown Ayton as the solution to all the Lakers' problems based on 18 minutes of preseason action. But there was also this undeniable excitement bubbling underneath the surface, because if this version of Ayton shows up consistently, it fundamentally changes the Lakers' championship calculus in ways that go beyond just adding another rotation piece. Let me paint you the complete picture of what really transpired during this segment, because the surface-level Ayton played well defensively headline completely misses the psychological context for why this specific performance matters. The specific criticism Perkins made about Austin Reaves not recognizing mismatches and feeding the big man. The frustrating reality that Ayton got only 2 field goal attempts in 18 minutes despite establishing deep post position repeatedly, and the harsh truth that 1 point in 18 minutes looks terrible in the box score, but actually wasn't Ayton's fault when you watch the actual game and see how many opportunities he created that simply got ignored by the ball handlers. This is about organizational fit and whether the Lakers can actually maximize a player who's been maddeningly inconsistent throughout his career despite having physical tools that most centers would kill for. Here's the foundational defensive framework that Richard Jefferson established, which explains why Ayton's performance was genuinely encouraging beyond just stat padding. Ayton talked all offseason about wanting to be a better shot blocker, a better rim protector, and a better overall defensive player who could return to that 2021 season when he was the defensive anchor of a finals team and the third-best defense in all of basketball with the Phoenix Suns. We all know he can defend at an elite level when he's engaged and motivated. The question was never about capability. It was always about whether he would buy in to the philosophy that defense wins championships even when his individual offensive numbers suffer as a result. Jefferson was showing specific possessions where Ayton was in perfect help position, where he rotated correctly to cover drives, where he contested without fouling, all the little details that championship-caliber big men execute consistently, but that Ayton has only shown in spurts throughout his career. And in this preseason game against Phoenix, Ayton showed exactly the kind of commitment the Lakers need him to maintain for an entire season. He was active on both ends of the floor, sprinting back in transition, contesting shots at the rim, grabbing defensive rebounds to start fast breaks, doing all the little winning plays that separate good big men from mediocre big men who just fill up empty statistics. Stephen A. was making this point about how it's easy for Ayton to say the right things in preseason interviews about wanting to be better defensively, but actually backing that up with real game action night after night after night through 82 games plus playoffs. That's the hard part most players never consistently accomplish. The difference between saying you want to be a defensive force and actually grinding through the physical toll of protecting the rim for 30-plus minutes every night is massive, and the Lakers need to see sustained evidence that Ayton has made that mental shift, rather than just having a good night against his former team in a meaningless exhibition. But here's where the discussion got really interesting and where Kendrick Perkins started getting visibly frustrated about what he was seeing on film. Ayton got only 2 field goal attempts in 18 minutes, despite working incredibly hard to establish deep post position, despite having multiple clear mismatches against smaller defenders, despite being wide open several times after setting solid screens and slipping to the rim as the roll man. And the reason he wasn't getting the ball wasn't because he wasn't in the right spots or wasn't creating opportunities. It was because Austin Reaves simply wasn't recognizing the mismatches and feeding the big man. Perkins was practically yelling at the screen during the film breakdown, pointing out possession after possession, where Ayton had done everything right offensively but got zero reward for his effort. The broadcast commentators literally called it out during the live game about how hard Ayton was working to establish position and how he was being completely ignored by Reaves' possession after possession after possession. There were multiple instances where Ayton had a 6'3" defender on him, and all Reaves needed to do was throw the ball up and let Ayton use his 40-inch vertical leap and 7'5" wingspan to just go grab it and finish. There were screens where Ayton slipped perfectly to the rim with a clear path for a lob, and Reaves completely looked him off, choosing instead to force contested mid-range jumpers or try to thread passes into traffic. There were post-up one-on-one situations where Ayton had established position against a smaller defender, and it would have been an easy bucket just dumping the ball down to him, but Reaves was so focused on his own offensive rhythm that he never even looked at the interior. The criticism Perkins was making, and I thought this was absolutely on point, is that Austin Reaves needs to do a better job recognizing these mismatches because he's in a contract year, and his value doesn't come from just scoring 20 points per game. Teams value Reaves because he can get you 20 points, but also grab 6 rebounds and dish out 6 to 8 assists as a secondary playmaker. When Luka Doncic is on the bench or gets the night off, Reaves is the primary ball handler, the guy with the ball in his hands, and he needs to be able to recognize when DeAndre Ayton has a 6'3" guy on him and just feed him for easy buckets. The Lakers had only 10 total assists in this game, which is absolutely unacceptable for a team that's supposed to be playing modern offensive basketball, and a huge reason for that assist drought was the failure to involve Ayton when he was creating high-percentage scoring opportunities through his off-ball work. Max Kellerman jumped in at this point with an interesting counter-argument about whether we should even be concerned about Ayton's offensive involvement, given that his primary value is on the defensive end. But Perkins shut that down immediately by pointing out that you can't keep a player motivated and engaged defensively if he's doing all the dirty work on offense and never getting rewarded with touches. Players are human beings who need positive reinforcement, and if Ayton is setting bone-crushing screens, establishing deep post position, and generally doing everything the coaching staff asks offensively, but then watching Austin Reaves ignore him to hunt his own shots, that's a recipe for frustration and disengagement that will eventually bleed into his defensive effort. Here's what really emerged from the entire NBA Today coverage that I think Lakers fans need to understand. Ayton's defensive performance was genuinely encouraging and suggests he may have finally internalized that this is his last chance to be part of a championship team. But the offensive side is complicated because he only scored 1 point in 18 minutes, not because he played poorly, but because he only got 2 field goal attempts despite creating probably 10-plus opportunities where he should have been fed the ball. When Luka Doncic returns, these problems disappear because Luka lives to feed big men in mismatches and has spent his entire career making role players look better through elite playmaking that finds open teammates rather than forcing his own offense. But until then, Austin Reaves needs to do a much better job of recognizing when his center is working hard on both ends and rewarding him by keeping him involved offensively. If Ayton can maintain this defensive energy and intensity while finally getting appropriate offensive touches once Luka returns, the Lakers might actually have something special brewing with this front court rotation that could legitimately challenge any team in the Western Conference when fully healthy and operating at peak efficiency.